Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today we're joined by Max Coleman, a researcher and student under Brad Schoenfeld, known for combining a no-nonsense practical approach with a solid foundation in evidence-based training and nutrition. Max has a knack for breaking down complex ideas into actionable insights that actually make a difference in the gym, in the kitchen, and in your results. In this episode, we dive into small but powerful adjustments you can make to your training, like how subtle tweaks to exercises can unlock more progress. We also explore how to think critically about fitness trends and how to use science productively without overcomplicating things. And for all the food lovers out there, we'll chat about Max's passion for cooking, his thoughts on the Ninja Creami, and how he balances delicious meals with staying on track. As a reminder, guys, if you like this sort of content, you will love the Mass Research Review. We have been subscribers of the Mass Research Review and affiliates for the Mass Research Review basically since it started because it's so good. It will give you bite-sized tips and information regarding the latest science for hypertrophy and strength, nutrition, training, all that good stuff can be found within Mass and much, much more. So if you're ever considering trying to find new scientific content, you want more of this sort of thing, more deep dives, then you definitely want to check that out. It's always linked in the description. Like I said, it's an affiliate link. So by subscribing to them and supporting the Mass Research Review and supporting your education and I guess the enjoyment of learning, you're also supporting us at Revive Stronger and the podcast as a whole. So thank you for that. Any subscribers who use our affiliate link. And whether or not you're looking to refine your training, optimize your nutrition, or just get inspired, this episode is packed with actionable takeaways. So let's get into it. So Max, we are now probably fairly deep into 2025 when this will come out. It'll probably come out towards February time. So people have already had a month into 2025. And I've just been visiting some of your content over on Instagram. If people aren't following you, big shout out to the stuff you're doing over there because I think it's great. But it just made me think of a good question for people who are heading into this year. And that is, what are some examples that you can think of where people could make small adjustments to their training but see significant improvements in their results? Like, hey, it's just an easy little thing you could do and you should see better results via this slight tweak. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I obviously we spoke about this off air, but I had a reel go, I guess, semi-viral is the first one that I had that went semi-viral, where we talked about this exact thing specific to the legs, because there are a lot of things you can do to drastically improve the results that you'll get from training that have been directly studied, right? So, for instance, the leaning back on the leg extension, everyone knows that famous John study. Shout out to Coach John in general, right? Where they saw nearly double the rec fem growth just from leaning back further on the leg extension, which is pretty crazy. There's obviously other examples as well. Just even the switching from seated to standing calf raises via the Burke et al. Study, as well as the other study that I believe was a Japanese study. But there's obviously things you can do for your upper body as well. So for instance, just switching from a traditional like triceps push down to taking that and going overhead will likely yield like much better results. Simply switching from like a standard barbell curl to maybe like I like Bayesian curls, but with a cable set higher. Or if you're already doing preacher curls, just setting that up so that it's a little bit more horizontal rather than vertical. Just changing the resistance curve a little bit can have pretty substantial improvements in your physique and in the amount of muscle you'll grow. Now, obviously, some of those are not nearly as well studied as the leg ones that I brought up. But there's at least a pretty strong logical basis for why these things would improve your results.
One of the other ones you mentioned was and this makes me upset personally because I don't have access to one, but the seated leg curl versus lying leg curl. My gym hasn't got a seated leg curl. It's only got standing or lying, which are basically kind of the same thing. But obviously that also was looked into. And I think even leaning forward, right? That even seemed to have an impact.
There's not there's no studies looking at leaning back versus leaning forward with a seated leg curl. That would be really cool. And I'm sure we'll see something like that here soon. But they did compare the like Nordic curl. So that one where it's kind of like changing it to an open chain exercise or closed chain. I never remember what that shit is. But they found substantially more growth doing the seated hamstring curl leaning forward compared to a like traditional Nordic curl. But obviously there's like a lot of ecological issues there. It was like an eccentric overload study as well. But again, there's no good reason why it will hurt your gains. So I don't see a reason to not do it personally.
Yeah.
Oh, and with respect to not having one at your gym, like it's kind of a bitch to set those up, but you can do it with like an incline bench and a cable stack. I think that is a completely reasonable way to do it. And I've seen your training. I know you're willing to spend like 2 to 3 hours in the gym a day. So I don't think that'll be a huge issue for you. And you have one of these like pseudo jobs where you can go to the gym basically at like 3 p.m. when no one else is there, which is really nice. But aside from that, yeah, I wouldn't worry. No, it's a pseudo job, but you're clearly killing it, bro.
No, yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I have set up similar things, and it is okay until a point, and then it becomes just the trade-off. I don't know, there needs to be a ratio of the ball ache to setting something else to the results that it provides.
Which is basically like biggest consideration for me for exercise selection now is, can I do it with the adjustable dumbbells and bench that I have in my house, or do I actually have to go to a gym and do it? And almost always I'm going to choose the former over the latter.
And that's a question as well. Do you think in some of these scenarios where someone might be like, oh, it might be similar to me, they haven't got a seated leg curl, so they think they're missing out on gains. Do you think they could set up a program so that they're not missing out on gains? Because I know what I think.
I mean, probably not. I mean, could you like could you jerry rig something to like be very similar to those exercises? That might help. But I do think you probably are missing out on something if you're leaving certain exercises on the table. Like if you're only ever doing a leg curl, for instance, and not even just a seated or standing, and you're avoiding like some sort of hip hinge, like I can't say this definitively, but I would be pretty confident that you're missing out on some sort of hamstring growth.
Yeah, I guess my thought is if I'm doing a hip hinge and I'm getting that stretched kind of component, then so long as I'm doing that and a lying leg curl, I'm kind of getting all the functions of the hamstring. Am I okay? I guess this is quite a selfish question now. To you, Max, do you think I'm missing out on hamstring gains by not having the seated leg curl in my program if I'm hip hinging and having some sort of kind of leg curl within the program?
I don't know, because there could be something uniquely beneficial about doing knee flexion when you're at a high degree of stretch in the hamstrings already. And I just can't say super confidently that you're like not missing out on gains, especially someone. Now, you asked, am I okay? Fuck yeah, you're okay. What are the stakes here? Like we're talking about like a nanogram of extra
everything.
muscle. Yeah, you do for sure. But like the average individual, and to be fair, people that listen to the Revive Stronger podcast aren't the average individual by any means. But I think that most people are going to be okay. And I kind of think about it as, is my grandma going to be able to tell a difference at the next pool party that I go to? Probably not. But will a bodybuilding judge be able to tell the difference? It's possible. I just don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just because I think sometimes, these kind of small tweaks where you get a bit more from basically just doing the same exercise but slightly differently are great. But then people sometimes miss the bigger picture of the context of the entire program. Like, could you make up for it via an extra set here or there, or via, like, again, your program design as a whole could be made as such to not worry about missing out on something here. So, or like leaning back on the leg extension, could you alternatively do like a reverse Nordic or a sissy squat and get even more gains? Again, these are all theoretical questions where you're like, you could make an argument for it, but we don't have data.
Theoretical questions that Milo Wolf seemingly knows the answer to. He's apparently sitting on something that we don't know. It's all love for Milo Wolf, of course.
Milo, he's getting enough stick from everyone else, Max. You don't have to.
Yeah, I don't need to pile on top of it, especially considering I consider him a friend. So the last thing I want to do is lambast him publicly, which I'm not doing, by the way. And I, by the way, entirely agree with him that the sissy squat is at least theoretically better than a leg extension, assuming you're someone that can actually get into that position, of course, and it's not uncomfortable for you.
Yeah, I like that take on things. And one of the questions I guess I have is, I'm sure you've seen it. So it's the kind of one of the most recent studies that I've been looking at, I guess, in some sense, the impact of range of motion on muscle growth / also the kind of resistance profile. It was the dumbbell lateral raise versus the kind of cable lateral raise.
Another incredible Sean study, obviously.
Yes. Do you have any thoughts on it, just straight off?
Of course I have thoughts on it. I think that it just throws yet another wrench into our kind of understanding of how resistance curves works across a different variety of muscles. The interesting thing about the delts is that we just don't have much research on them at all. They're just like a somewhat difficult muscle to assess via ultrasound. So we don't have a lot of studies looking at the growth of the delts. So I think it's like a very initial great puzzle piece, obviously, but it doesn't tell us a whole lot. It's possible, and I've said this before. Well, other people have postulated this, but I don't think it really works. They basically said that like when this whole like partial wrong, like LPs were coming out, like the partials were coming out, that like maybe it's just because we were assessing it in muscles that are weaker in the like stretched position, as opposed to maybe if, and I think actually Lane Norton said this, he was like, maybe if we studied a lateral raise, which is the hardest at the top end range, then maybe that would show us like a benefit to using that as opposed to a cable. Clearly there's no difference, or at least not clearly, but seemingly there's no difference between the two, which I actually think is kind of great news. Personally, I actually think I said this on your podcast the first time I was on, where when I first started training, and first started getting into really into like evidence-based fitness, I really wanted science to tell me exactly what I had to do. And it basically will never do that. But what it can do is basically show you that all of these are options. So you get to just pick and choose which one you want to do, which is really nice because cable lateral raises can be a bitch. You almost always have to do them unilaterally, which is really annoying. And being able to replace those with dumbbell lateral raises at seemingly no cost is a kind of a huge benefit to me, in my opinion. So do both if you're looking to grow as much muscle as possible, is my hedge your bets answer.
I know some of the people have like assessed the study, and actually I have to be honest, I haven't had the time to kind of go through and read it, and I do want to, but I don't think the cable was set up at hand height so that the resistance was like peak forces where it stretched, right? And they could have theoretically come further, stretch the delt further with the cable, right?
Well, so they definitely could have stretched the delt further, but again, this isn't necessarily about stretch. It's about like where the exercise is the hardest. So for instance, like the cast lateral raise that I've seen a lot of people doing. I know Mike over at Revive Stronger is a big fan of that one, at least I've seen him using dumbbells for that exercise, and I really love it. You do feel a gnarly stretch. It's the one where, for those that don't know, your arm, exactly, comes across your body, which I think is a gnarly exercise. That seems to stretch the lateral delt. No idea if it actually does. But the one picture I saw from that John study did make it look like the cable was maybe a little lower than it could have been for maximizing where the resistance curve was with respect to the stretch position. But it's kind of a really small difference, to the point where like I don't think had they used it one notch up, it would have been like, oh, now we see double the growth in the delts because of that. Like, yeah, maybe it could have been better. And maybe that was just the image that they used, which maybe was a poor choice. Maybe it was what they actually did. And maybe Sean had a really good logical rationale for why he did it, because he's an incredibly intelligent dude and a really good researcher. I mean, he's over the last couple of years been really pumping out some dope studies. So I definitely trust him. I'd like to hear his thoughts on that, obviously. But yes, from the one image I saw, maybe they could have had that cable height a little bit higher.
And then to play the role of Milo Wolf here, be like, well, what if they extended the time they did the study? I think there was like a small percentage increase in growth from the cable versus the dumbbell, insignificant. But if you extended that out over a longer time course, are we seeing more growth? I don't know.
It's kind of is that something Milo said directly? Like,
no.
Okay.
I just saw, I believe it was actually Menno on one of his slides. He kind of said there was insignificant difference, but there's actually was a percentage higher for the lateral delt on the cable lateral raise. Yeah,
but you never want to, and I'm certainly not going to argue with Menno on statistics because he understands that topic far better than I do. But he also understands that you never want to look at raw percentages as as far as like which intervention actually provided a benefit. Like there's a reason we do more complex like statistical analyses than that. Also, the longer study thing is like one of my least favorite arguments that people to bring up. And you'll notice that they only ever use it when a study kind of like goes against what it is that they what the findings of the study go against whatever bias they previously had, which isn't to say it's a completely invalid argument. Yes, of course, 8-week studies, 6-week studies, even 12-week studies, like they do not perfectly extrapolate to a training career. I mean, Steve, you've been lifting for like 15 years. So like clearly an 8-week study isn't going to perfectly replicate over the course of a training career. But at least from like a strict like logical argument, it doesn't really like hold for me. I don't think it really is if you don't see, especially, and I think this lateral raise study was done in trained lifters. Is that correct? I could be misremembering that. Let's even say that it was, right? I think that the magnitude of effect you're going to see, if you don't see much at all, like I don't see any rationale for why that would be different over a longer course or a longer time course.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. No, I appreciate your thoughts on it. And I think your comment in regards to like science is never going to give you the perfect prescription, but it can give you tools. And it's essentially saying, hey, both of these are very effective. And I think it was a client actually asked me about it, and I was just like, I was never throwing out the dumbbell lateral raise, but it was a good reminder not to kind of jump on a extreme stance on something too soon, because we're just learning more and more. It's kind of like, I don't know, if you have one study on a given supplement, it could be the next study it shows completely opposite or worse results. So it's like, wait till there's a lot of data before throwing out, especially tools like a dumbbell lateral raise that a lot of people have found to be producing results for a long time. So I think it was just a good reminder of that.
Yeah, I think so as well. I mean, I think that like, I think I'm stealing this analogy from Daniel Plotkin, and maybe he stole it from someone else, but science is not like a roadmap that tells you what you're doing in training. It's basically a flashlight, and the more studies you have, the brighter that flashlight can be with respect to pointing you in which direction you're supposed to be going. And I think that, yeah, of course, like the one study comes out showing that dumbbell lateral raises are just the same. That doesn't mean that I immediately write off cable lateral raises as being better either. Like, it's certainly possible that they are. We just need more studies. And I think that the strength of your opinion, this goes without saying, should always comport with the amount of evidence we have on any given topic, which is basically to say that your strength of opinion in anything with respect to hypertrophy literature should be very low, unless it's like volume or intensity or even something like that, because it's such a young field. And I feel like I say that all the time, but I feel like people constantly forget that this field started in like the 1960s. So like, your strength of opinion on most things can't be all that strong.
Yeah, it's actually great seeing how much it has grown. And I feel like it has grown exponentially over the last decade. With a number of, like, for yourself coming through, and like everyone who I've like various names I could reel off who I've had on the podcast. Because I know initially it was like, hey, Brad Schoenfeld's doing a real work.
Yeah, exactly. And he carried the team. I mean, he's like, certainly like, he's a seminal figure in this field for sure. But yeah, like, dude, 6 years ago, it was like, you guys remember that EMG study that showed this bicep exercise is better than this one? Let's do that exercise. And like I agreed that the distance we've come from like 2010 to 2024 is far greater than from, I don't even, 1990 to 2010 or something like that.
Yeah. How do you actually fit? Actually, I guess this is a good question, because I do think along with that, obviously, social media has grown massively. And now science wasn't really ever used as like a marketing tool as such. It was kind of like not cool. Whereas now it's very cool. And people are trying to be like, I'll say science-based over evidence-based, because I think those are actually different. How do you feel about it, like science being used the way it is? And sometimes your work actually, and I have used it like to put out information and kind of use it for various like arguments or why I do certain things. How do you feel about it in general? Do you think there's a kind of an appropriate way to use it, an inappropriate way to use it?
Fuck yeah. Of course there's an inappropriate way to. I was actually just talking to Brad about this, Dr. Schoenfeld, about this, saying that like, I really dislike, can't stand people that are like the dude that punched Jeff, right? Like people that are just like, science is dumb, like, oorah. It's like, yeah, all right, bro, you're really convincing. Well, unfortunately you are convincing a lot of people, but they will die out. Like that like ideology of like anti-vaxxer, flat earther, like science doesn't tell us anything type of mind. Like they're going to go by the wayside. Science is the future for sure. But what I dislike far more is the idiots that like bastardize science and do use it as a marketing tool. Like, for instance, yes, you're right. Science was not like a huge thing like 10 years ago, even, I would say. And then individuals like Jeff Nippard, yourself, Mike Israetel, Jeremy Etier, like they all showed that like, oh, science can be a really good marketing tool for drawing an audience, and an honest one as well, because all of those people I named generally do a really good job of being honest about what the state of the science says. And then with respect to kind of misappropriating it and using my own work, this is like one of my favorite anecdotes ever. And this is not a slight against Eugene Tao. I think he is another one of those examples who uses science like very well, and is very honest about the state of the literature in general. And he's very clear about when he's using personal anecdotes versus scientific evidence, which I think is amazing. However, so I had to give all that compliment sandwich before I say this. He made a reel several years ago about like interset stretching between calf raises has been shown to be really effective for increasing calf growth, which it hasn't. There's one study on it, and it was a study that Derek Van Avery did at Lehman, and I actually had the opportunity to help him perform that study or carry out that study. And I commented on his video, and I was like, Eugene Tao's video, and I was like, I don't know if we can say that it's very effective given the current state of the literature. Our study showed 1 millimeter difference in growth in the soleus, so I don't think it's really anything like crazy. And he just hit me back with the PMID of my study and was like, no, see, this study shows it. And I didn't respond or anything, but he and he ratioed me. He got like way more likes than my comment did. Not that that's important or anything, but it's a great example of like a slightly misappropriated use of science. And that is a wildly small example. And again, no slight on Eugene Tao at all. I think he's the GOAT. But there are a lot of people who do far worse. Obviously, the Paul Carters of the world who just fucking dumbasses, and I can't stand, obviously. Not that he'll ever hear me say that by any means, but like people who basically take small mechanistic rationales and extrapolate those to a training career, for instance. Basically doing the exact opposite of what you and I just talked about, but not even with an actual like intervention RCT study, but like a small mechanism of action. Then they think that that can then apply to a 15-year training career. Like, I love that science is being pushed more and more, but with that comes the fact that a lot of people are going to inappropriately use science as a marketing tool without actually acknowledging like what science is. Okay, sorry. Last thing I'll say about this. Jeff Nipper did his video on the length and partial study that he funded that Milo Wolf and other individuals at Lehman carried out. And I think he did an unbelievably good job of outlining like the actual scientific process. Because like a lot of times you see influencers talk about a study and they like really gloss over it and go right to the findings and right to like the practical applications. But he really dug into the actual process of data collection and how we came up with the methods and stuff like that. And I think it was a really, really well done. I mean, he even went into depth on like why within subject designs are better for statistical power. It was like amazing. And I think it's the future. And I'm like really excited to see that. So it leans positive. Okay, I'll stop rambling, please.
No, yes, so well said. I think it's one immediate example I think of is if you listen to this podcast, you're a coach and you know the hierarchy of evidence, you might then be like, okay, so meta-analysis, strongest form of evidence. When I do a post, I'm going to go find a meta-analysis and use that as like my reference point. And they're unlikely to have read the whole meta-analysis, very much not reading every study. I mean, that's a real big task. And then they could just use that as their reference point for a recommendation. But it's like some meta-analyses even aren't like that strong to kind of make such a statement even. So it's like, it's a real challenge to be quote unquote perfect with using kind of science in many ways. But I think what you mentioned where differentiating between, if you're going to make a point, differentiate between whether or not that's something that's been researched and give like a reference if you can. And if it's your own opinion, make it clear it's your own opinion. That's fine to have that as well. That's part of the hierarchy of evidence as well. But I think
expert opinions aren't worthless, obviously. They're very valuable.
Yeah, for sure. And then not kind of jumping the gun, like I said, like people are jumping on this new research on length and partials, and then they're like, disregard, if you're doing this exercise, like throw it away, you're getting no gains. And it's like those extreme stances. And then it comes back to something that we've discussed on here is scientific communication and making sure you're doing that in a good manner. And there's way worse examples. You mentioned Eugene, and I would say like typically very, very good.
Incredible.
I'm sure
I want to say it for the third time, incredible. Like I do not want to slate Eugene Tao at all.
No, for sure. And if you were to kind of do that again to him, I think he'd probably come back differently this time after many years. I think he's even matured to that point where he'd be like, oh, dude, like I'll take that into consideration. And then there's, especially in the nutrition space, really bad examples of people just making crap up and referencing things that don't even have any kind of relevance towards what they're saying, but people just like, oh, science, I buy into it. And it's kind of putting a bad name on science and scientists, which I hate to see, which is kind of, it's a strange time.
It is. And I think that's what I was saying with respect to like, I think that when I said like flat earthers and anti-vaxxers and stuff, like, yes, I know it's extreme. Yes, I know that I'm kind of like reductio ad absurdum or whatever that logical fallacy is. But like, I do believe it, that the reason the idea that you can like use science and like inappropriately use science could lead to a distrust in science because people will see it being misused and think, oh, well, that means that science is actually worthless to us because clearly these people are wrong who are using science. And that like really, really bothers me and gets to me, obviously, because even before I'm a lifter, and actually talked to Daniel Plotkin about this kind of recently, like I love lifting. Lifting has been a big part of my life for a very long time. In fact, even longer than science has. But before I'm a lifter, I think I like identify personally as a scientist. And the idea that people are coming in and kind of like bastardizing and putting a bad name on something that I'm this passionate about, yeah, it obviously gets me like really worked up. So I'm quick to say really negative things about like the Paul Carters of the world, for instance, and stuff like that. I had another point with respect to science and meta-analyses, but I can't remember it right now. So I'm sure I'll cut you off here in a second and come back to it.
I did want to say with Jeff Nippard, I think he's obviously done a huge service to the industry and the field, but also kind of evidence-based space. And then, yeah, explaining key things like that is super important because, again, I'm sure I've seen it where people are like, "Oh, I told you length and partials are completely void and null and void."
Thank you. Here's the cutoff. Thank you. Thank you. Is that like, I think it's so funny with respect to like the cognitive dissonance within the evidence-based side or the science-based side instead of the evidence-based side. And I do think there is a distinct difference there. And I think that's beautiful that you pointed that out. Individuals, like let's rewind the clock like 7 years where someone would tell you that, if you don't drink a protein shake right after your workout, you just wasted a workout. And people who are science-based, even not even evidence-based, but science-based, would laugh in their face saying, ha, 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 no, that's so silly. Don't you know, blah, 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 blah. And then fast forward 7 years and those same people are quick to tell you that a lateral raise is worthless and you should only be doing a cable lateral raise. And they don't recognize the just severe cognitive dissonance that's going on there. And that is a really good example of a misappropriation of science where you rely on a study that says one thing. And then those same people here in like fast forward then again, where we have this new Sean study showing the dumbbell lateral raise versus cable lateral raise, they go, okay, then the cable lateral raise is worthless. Let's get back to dumbbells and stuff like that. So I thank you. I'm sorry for interrupting, but that's exactly the point that I was thinking of a second ago.
It's actually hilarious. It makes me think of Dr. Andrea Love talked about this with anti-vaxxers, because you mentioned anti-vaxxers and them having tattoos. It's like there's very limited like scientific evidence that tattoos like completely harmless or whatever, but there's like good evidence that vaccines are going to be really helpful for your health and well-being and what have you. It's like, do you not see the kind of cognitive dissonance there? It's
infuriating. And just to use a lifting example, like people are the kind of within, and I don't want to mischaracterize Paul Carter. Like you should always argue in good faith, even when you're arguing against someone that you disagree with vehemently. So I don't want to misappropriate his stance on the matter, but I think he's like pretty big on lower reps are better for growth. Because higher reps cause more fatigue. And we have far more evidence suggesting that higher reps and lower reps cause equally good muscle growth, and way less evidence suggesting that higher reps are much worse for fatigue measures, which is an incredibly difficult thing to measure in the first place. So that has always been like incredibly confusing. And that's just one small example of relying on a smaller pool of data, and not even just the number of studies, but like how well controlled are these studies? How well are the methods? How well are the statistical analyses of these studies? And relying on a much shittier sample to kind of just so you can like argue your whatever narrative you're trying to push, and ignoring the much larger pool of data that we have just because it goes against the exact same narrative that you're trying to push. And that happens far more often outside of the fitness and nutrition space, but those are just some examples that of it happening within our field.
It's interesting because that's the sort of thing I'll be sent, and someone will send me a post from maybe Paul Carter and be like, thoughts. And I'm like, often when I'm assessing such a thing, I'm like, if it goes really far against the grain of what generally evidence-based practitioners are suggesting, who we tend to think are generally promoting the right sort of information, I'm always like very skeptical. So I'm just thinking of a way where people can assess what people are doing. If they're talking in kind of a bit black and white terms, a little bit dogmatic, and if they're heavily going against what kind of the conventional wisdom is, not that it's always wrong, but that should raise some like, I'm not sure about this.
Yeah, of course, man. Of course. Basically just like, and this is not like a foolproof method, but like there are really quick ways to sniff test stuff now. Like anytime you see someone make a claim on about nutrition or fitness, like just ask ChatGPT what an example it like what it thinks about that. And of course, ChatGPT is not infallible. Like it's going to get stuff wrong, but like people aren't even willing to G-check that. Like they're not even willing to take that. Like the tools at our disposal now have lowered the barrier to entry of learning like so fucking low, and people still aren't willing to do it if they hear something that they like and kind of already comports with like whatever idea they already have. It's infuriating.
For 2025, we're going to make G-check that. It's going to become a thing.
Well, it's fun. Speaking of Milo Wolf, the first thing Milo Wolf ever said to me in person is he came over to my house, and I have spices, sorry about this, hanging on my refrigerator right there.
Fancy.
And the first thing this man said to me is he came and he said, I got to G-check your spices. And then like went through all of my spices that I have in my house, because he also really likes to cook and stuff like that. And so G-check has then been added to my vernacular in perpetuity. I love that term.
Love that. Is there anything else, maybe even outside of studies, maybe even just through your coaching practice, your personal experience, things that you think people should be thinking about in the new year to make their training more effective? Is there anything that kind of comes to mind? It could be as small as, hey, for your pulling exercises, you probably want to be using some straps or VersaGrips if your grip is a limiting factor.
Even if it's not, use some VersaGrips. I don't get paid to say that. Obviously, they're not reaching out to people with less than 10,000 followers, but just a big fucking fan of VersaGrips and think that they're amazing.
I'd love a sponsorship. They can sponsor the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, if they threw one to Renaissance Periodization, the least they could do is throw one to big names like us, Steve. Little thing. I mean, yeah, there's like an infinite number of things. So I'm just going to give a really cliche answer, which is, I know that we're kind of in a big, and especially if you're listening to the Revive Stronger podcast, you clearly value research and what science can tell us. But that should mean that you also recognize the limitations of science, which is to say, make your training enjoyable. Like whatever you like. And I know that this is the Revive Stronger podcast. I know that you guys are already in love with fitness and stuff like that. But everyone, including Steve and myself, sorry, I don't want to speak for you, Steve, have periods where it's harder to get to the gym. Like strictly from a psychological motivational aspect. Like, yes, it's my favorite thing to do in the day, but like, if I have to go to the gym and do something that like is theoretically better on paper because X study showed me so, but I just really fucking hate doing it, like it's just not sustainable. And I think it's the Eric Helms, you got to ref yourself. Like you have to make sure. Yep. Yeah, exactly. You have to make sure that you actually want to be doing the thing that you're forcing yourself to do. Or hopefully you wouldn't be forcing yourself to do. So making training sustainable and enjoyable for you is like actually one of the most important things that you can do with respect to your training, longevity and what have you. So that's definitely my like cliche answer. I'm sure that I could come up with like a billion other small things that you can do. Yes, like using straps, train your forearms because they have a big impact on your physique for sure. And then, but like anything else is going to be just rattling off stuff people probably already know on this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree. I think I love that message generally. And I would say the longer I coach, the longer I do this, those little things that sometimes people think are going to make a huge difference in the long run end up not really mattering that much. And as you said, you got to be doing this for the long run, especially as a natural bodybuilder. Muscle growth is like watching paint dry. It's the slowest thing ever. If you don't enjoy it, it's not going to be sustainable. You're not going to do it long term. And in fact, and you'll know this yourself, like you don't invest as much if you don't enjoy it. If you go into the gym and you've got, I don't know, hip thrusts, or Bulgarian split squats, that's a key one. Like in your program, you're like, yeah, it's the right thing I should be doing, but I hate them. You're just going to rush through it and whatever.
Yeah, you'll go through the motions, right? You're not going to like actually put the intent to train in there. And like, given the things that we know really matter for like muscle growth, right? Like make sure you're training enough, using enough volume, make sure you're training hard, and make sure you're like doing so consistently and using the right exercises. Like if you're knocking out like two of those things because of some theoretical reason, but ultimately it leads to you pushing less hard or just skipping things even, obviously that's going to have a huge negative impact on your physique in the long run and shouldn't be something that you're focusing on. Like in my first 2 years at Lehman, or my first year at Lehman in the master's program under Dr. Schoenfeld, I was like so like red pilled with respect to like evidence-based red pilled, whatever that would look like, meaning like I had to do everything absolutely correctly. And my physique got so much better after I ditched that mentality and started just doing what I had to do, like to make sure that it was enjoyable and sustainable for me. And I have to give a huge shout out to like Derek Van Avery and Daniel Plotkin for kind of like ingraining that into my brain. Like stop thinking in terms of weeks and days and start thinking in terms of months and years. Right. And I know it's cliche, but I do think it's better advice than people often give credit for.
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. Additionally, you get access to our exclusive Revive Stronger member site, where you'll be able to watch over hundreds of hours worth of educational content. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
Yeah, I like that. It's actually funny. I had 3 big takeaways from my coaching in 2024 for this topic, and one of them was more doing, less thinking, which lines up with this really nicely. And the other one, which actually does line up with this, was less comparison. Not looking at, oh, this expert says this, or this trainee, natural bodybuilder, elite does this, and focusing on actually their own N=1 study. What's happening in front of you? What's leading to better results for you? It could be actually quite different to someone else, and it just fits within the principles, which are just quite wide bumpers. So I kind of had those. I
think that's beautiful. It's funny. I work with Jeremy Etier at Built with Science. I do posts for him as well as Daniel Plotkin, and I just wrote one yesterday about how science is the best. We all love science, but if you love science, you recognize the limitations of science. And one of those is that basically all of the data that we currently have, and probably this will be true for a long time, is based on group averages, right? So just because 10 to 20 sets, which isn't really the volume recommendation anymore, but just because of the idea that more is better until it starts working against you, it's very possible that it will start working against you much earlier than it does for other people, right? So if after 15 sets a week for your biceps, something you'll never have to do, Steve, you fucking asshole. But if that just causes you wicked elbow pain and you're just unable to recover from it or whatever it may be, then clearly it's not what's best for you, even though on average and according to the best data we have, it is. I think listening to yourself and running N=1 experiences on yourself is one of the most evidence-based things you can do, using science as a roadmap and using the data we have as a guiding process, but not trying to get it to tell you every single thing that you're supposed to do in the gym. I think that's really beautifully said.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. And that's why I love people like the guys at 3DMJ is a good example of this, where they keep a thumb on evidence-based practice for sure, and the scientific research rather, but then they've got just heaps of experience with clients. I like to put myself in that shoebox as well.
As you should.
The fact
as
that
you should.
We also do that, but that's why, like you said, expert opinion, especially experts who understand the value of science, that combination is just you get some really, really valuable insights on that.
Yeah, I think it was oh goodness, I'm forgetting, Lee Bell out of Sheffield, who was the first person to ever introduce me to practice-based evidence, which is basically the idea that we build studies and decide to run studies based on the practices of experts that are completely separate from research and academia, obviously, right? The momentum study that we just did at Lehman, that was led by Francesca, whose last name I'll always mispronounce, so I won't even try. But that was an idea that Jeff Nippert had. He didn't create the whole study, but he has been talking for the last 5 years about wanting to do a study in which a little bit of momentum is used to see if that will actually improve the physique, because clearly there are a lot of bodybuilders that do that, and there's also a lot of bodybuilders that lift super strictly, so that's never a good idea. We never base decisions based on one bodybuilder's training protocols, but it's a really good idea and a good place to look for forming ideas for what we can study, right? It's like the idea that no, Wikipedia is not a valid source for citations, but it's a damn good place to look if you're trying to formulate some ideas on a thing.
Or Reddit is probably another good one.
Yeah, anywhere, like, obviously is a good place to look as far as like gaining ideas for a thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best evidence, obviously.
Yeah, really well said. And that's what I love about science. It's like there's lots of things that are like conventional wisdom or what have you, but it's like, but is there actually evidence to back that up? When we look into it, are we actually getting anything there? So yeah, something I wanted to move on to then is a very similar ilk, is then onto nutrition. So I don't know if there's anything that comes to mind for you where small little wins by making small changes to their nutrition to kind of see better results.
So yeah, I mean, this was obviously like nutrition. I love nutrition. I love nutrition science, but it's just not something that I spend nearly as much time thinking about as training and the training literature that we have with respect to hypertrophy. But one of the, and basically this is all going to fall under the exact same umbrella of finding what works for you, especially with nutrition. Like I've talked about this, and you and I have actually talked about this on the first time I was on the pod, but like the roads that lead to Rome with respect to muscle growth are like nearly infinite. The number of ways you can skin a cat or layer a cake or whatever it may be are like nearly infinite with respect to hypertrophy. And it's even more vast with respect to nutrition. So like whatever specific goal you're trying to achieve, as long as you find the system that actually works for you, that's amazing. And it's probably great. I think I've said this before. The only fad diet that I don't really recommend people do is the carnivore diet. I think it's like fucking so stupid and like crazy hearing people talk about that shit. But aside from that, if a diet works for you, fuck yeah, let's do it. Let's run it. Intermittent fasting, great. Like alternate day fasting, great. Like vegan diets, keto, you name it. I'm a big fan of. But if assuming it helps you achieve your goal, right? As far as small tweaks, one kind of silly heuristic that I actually really like is another shout out to the 3DMJ guys, which is like try and have 1 to 2 servings of fruit and veggies per 1,000 calories that you have. Like, I don't know what it is about my stupid lizard brain that just resonated with better than trying to maintain a certain fiber to carbohydrate ratio with respect to the amount of calories that I'm getting. But that was like huge for me. And then if we want to make it as simple as possible, I tell people to worry about 2 things, protein and calories. If you get those 2 things in check, you're good. You've done everything that you need to do and nothing else is required with respect to achieving your goals. Will certain micronutrients have an effect on your physique in the long run? Maybe, and it's worth hedging your bets by eating a wide variety of foods to achieve that. But aside from that, like, man, if you're hitting your protein and calories, like you're hitting 95% of all of the things that you need to be doing in order to achieve your physique goals. It's just a matter of finding what ways of sustaining a consistent calorie and protein intake will work for you. Not sure if that really answered your question. I'm happy to go into more like specific details, but nutrition is just a pretty straightforward area for me.
Yeah, I do view nutrition very similarly. Like I used to like, I've forgotten, was it John Ivey? And he had his like nutrient timing book that came out when nutrient timing was like the thing, because we just didn't have enough research to say it wasn't. And
we still don't.
I love that.
To be clear.
Yeah. We can't rule it out completely, but certainly the recommendations in that book were kind of, it was almost the pyramid was nutrient timing was the base and then calories were above it. It's like, hey, I think we're kind of putting the cart before the horse in a sense here. So like, I like those things, but the more I learn, similar to you, the more I realize it needs to be sustainable. And the thing I would say that I find with the clients that are struggling versus the clients that aren't, the ones that almost make their diet just part of their lifestyle on the back burner, they eat very similarly day to day, but they don't get stressed. They can kind of come in and out of tracking more precisely or not. The more it can just be on the back burner and you don't have to think about it too much, the better. And that takes time to get to, but planning just helps a ton. Those who, they hit evidence-based practice, they see if it fits your macros and flexible dieting, they're like, oh, that sounds real fun. And they literally every meal they're logging and like freeballing it. And by the end of the day, they've got like, 50 fat, 10 protein and like 2 carb. It's like, oh, what can I eat? I need olive oil and like, I don't know, like a few nuts or something. And this hits my numbers.
I get it. Like I was that individual, like when you and I were working together, even though I knew that it was silly to try and hit your shit to the gram, like I was like, I'm hitting my stuff to each macro to the gram. Like I'm killing it. And I was like, I just wish that I could have back the time and mental fortitude that I spent trying to be super precise with that stuff. Because in the long, not even in the long run, in the short run, it doesn't make a difference. Like assuming, and the thing that's unfortunate is given my like food is a huge part of my life. Like I love food. I love eating out. I love cooking, all of it. And I can't be someone who just eats the same thing every single day, but I still had to find ways in which I was able to kind of like scratch the itch of being able to cook new meals all the time while still maintaining a calorie deficit. Especially that gets even harder as you get into like leaner and leaner stages. But I basically found that like, okay, I can still have basically make chicken and rice, but there are a lot of different countries in the world that eat chicken and rice in a different way. And like basically doing that, it takes a little bit more time and effort, but it's worth it for me because it scratches the itch of being able to cook and eat new things every day. But a lot of people don't need that. And so just meal prepping for a 7-day period is great for them. And if it works for you, it works for you. Great. But it doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, again, understanding yourself and be like, hey, Steve does, I don't know, I basically have the same meals and then dinner is a bit rotation. It rotates now and then, not that much. I like switch between salmon and eggs basically. So it's pretty robotic.
Salmon has become a new favorite of mine. Yeah. So I guess to give a more like precise what I actually do with respect to dieting is basically the same thing. I do a form of intermittent fasting to a certain extent where basically like I'll have like caffeine, some sort of caffeine drink throughout the day, like maybe 1 or 2. I've started pulling that back a little bit. And then some sort of like protein feeding early in the morning, midday. And that leaves me like a good bit of calories to have in the evening. So I can kind of like still cook a pretty fun meal. Nothing crazy, obviously. I'm not eating like lasagna with like bread rolls on the side when I'm dieting or
Garlic
anything like
bread.
that.
Oof.
But still like something fun that actually tastes good. You know what I mean? So that's like what my actual diet looks like, especially when I'm cutting. When I'm bulking, I basically follow all the same things, except I don't pay super close attention to what I'm eating in the evenings. I just make sure that I get my protein, and I just make sure that my weight isn't like accelerate. Like I'm not gaining like 1% of body weight a week or anything like that.
I think that's a really good example of how someone might look at that who is like obsessed with quote unquote being optimal or perfect and kind of maximizing every single little variable. But if to do that, it means you don't adhere, or you like short or long term, there's no point doing it. And you might theoretically be missing out on this tiny thing somewhere, like, hey, maybe having some more carbs earlier in the day would help with your workout performance by like this tiny margin or something. I'm just trying to think of something that where
which
it might
the
be,
data doesn't suggest, which is crazy.
Yeah,
like keto diets are even surprised. Not that bad. You know what I mean? Like saying from an anecdotal experience, like training on keto is the fucking worst, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, let alone myself. But maybe it's just as sustainable. Like maybe with all the backup systems that we have in our physiology, like it's totally fine. Would I recommend it as optimal? Of course not. But now I'm certainly at a place where I wouldn't say that you can't do keto and still build the same amount of muscle or anything like that.
But I know even as an example for me, like I like an intra workout. I think it, especially under situations where you could be at risk of glycogen depletion and being quite depleted, such as like deep stages of a contest prep where you're really lean and on low carbs and maybe training with reasonable volumes. But at that point, I'm like, I am not spending any calories on liquid carbohydrates. So I chuck the drink out the way, and I'm like, I'm going to save those extra 100, 200 calories and have more fruit and veg, which is going to allow me to adhere to this god-awful position that I'm in where I'm really hungry. So I think it's just situations like that where people might get too obsessed with doing one thing, and like it needs to come back to adherence every single time. And as a coach, that again, it's confirmed it. And those little, like having that intra workout really would have made that big a difference. No, it wouldn't.
It would if it like psychologically it was necessary for you, obviously, like maybe it would, but like, especially with training, like, I don't know about you, Steve, but I'm not someone who gets like really hungry after training or anything like that. In fact, I think because of the like increase in like adrenaline that you get from the like training window, hunger is usually pretty low for me. So I can actually push off eating a little bit further because of that, which might not be ideal considering that I'm like decreasing the window by which MPS could be higher and stuff like that. But it still makes it easier to maintain that calorie deficit, which in the long run is far more important than whatever X fraction of a percent that you're going to get from eating your protein very close to your training window.
One that I think I've just been growing to learn more and more and respect more and more is, I think too many people put, and this is kind of a nutritional one, you could say supplementation lifestyle kind of, is pre-workouts. I think they're just one of the most used and useless supplements that there is. I don't think there's good evidence to really utilize them. It's mostly caffeine, and then even caffeine as an ergogenic aid, yes, but I don't think we've got any research that says, hey, if you take caffeine pre-workout, we grow more muscle. I like you saying that there's zero evidence.
Shocking that we don't have a study on that to me, but supposedly there's one in the works. But I don't know when that's actually going to be released, or if even if that's like an actual memory, or if I just fabricated that here on the spot. The main, caffeine thing, go ahead.
My main point with that is, I'm like, sleep over everything. So if they're having that caffeine, especially if you're working out anywhere near the evening, it's just not worth the trade-off, and it just leads to a negative feedback loop. Yeah, true. I'm kind of almost assuming most people get impacted by it, but like you say, that's the average.
yeah, and it certainly is. Like, and I think a lot of people it does affect, and they just they're like unwilling to admit it. But there certainly are individuals where like they could have a cup of coffee, or even like a hardcore pre-workout at 7 p.m., work out until like 8:30, go home, and they're asleep by 10 as if they didn't have any caffeine at all. And like, I think is beta alanine is the one that gives you the tingles, right? Not citrulline malate. Okay. So like, yes, there's not any convincing evidence that that's going to have like a big impact on your workout. So I'm basically arguing with you because I agree that supplements are outside of the evidence-based community. Supplements are overrated. Within the evidence-based community, I honestly think supplements are underrated because people are so quick to write them off. But like, there are instances even where I would recommend BCAAs. Like, do I think that you should be taking BCAAs? Probably not. But if you're someone who like, let's say that you're like medicated through the day, like you take Adderall for whatever reason, like and it's really hard for you to eat throughout the day. Like, it might actually be beneficial for you to drink some BCAAs throughout the day because it's easy to get in and there's at least something there, right? Or creatine obviously is like super beneficial, or even just the psychological aspect of beta alanine or pre-workouts, like that can be something incredible for you. Now, of course, if any of what I just said interferes with any of the actual boulders of training, it's not worth it. But I just think that people are so quick to write off the effect of supplements that we're just going to call them worthless. I know you're not actually doing that, but people are often quick to do that, and without actually giving the nuance of how supplements can be beneficial, including pre-workout.
Yeah, I think it's similar to, again, being like, hey, if you're don't do leg extensions, you should be stretching the rec fem as much as possible to grow as much muscle as possible. It's like, hey, if there's just like a few handful of studies saying that this like carbohydrate timing is not doing much for workout performance, it's like, yeah, but if there's a wealth of evidence elsewhere, or even like some mechanistic evidence, like we should not throw that out completely and say you're just default wrong because we have all this science to say you're wrong or right. I think it was Daniel Plotkin who recently did a post on this where it's like, science isn't telling you the answer, it's giving you directions. I always think of, I don't know if you've heard of this, Max, you might have. It throws back all the way to Alan Aragon, who I know is still in the space, but when I was initially getting into evidence-based practice, he was like the guy. And he talked about this bead model of truth. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I don't think so. I don't remember it at the very least.
I don't know why it really sunk and stuck with me. It's from this guy called Dr. Littleton. But basically it's like a bead on a wire, and then it's like 1 to 0. And basically this bead is just getting nudged in either direction of like, we have full confidence in this or zero confidence in this. And so whenever I'm viewing studies, I'm just like, where's that nudging my confidence in regard to that question of like carbohydrate timing matters? Oh, it nudged me over here, it nudged me over there. So yeah, I always just like to think of that heuristic versus black and white.
Yeah, I think I actually really like that. And now it's certainly going to stick with me if it didn't before. But Daniel and I actually have talked about this quite a lot. I get all of my ideas from Daniel Plotkin. So if you think, just follow him, don't follow me if you're actually looking for information. But he's talked about, he and I have gone back and forth with respect to like, maybe in science, we don't actually change our mind all that often. Like, people are quick to say it's good to change your mind in science. And Daniel was actually the first person I heard push back on this. And he's like, well, I don't think we should really change our mind all that much. But because if there's weak evidence for something, we shouldn't have a strong opinion on that for when better evidence comes out and we just automatically switch. Rather, it should be, he didn't say that directly, but using these two analogies together, if we have a bunch of weak evidence for something, it should shift that beat over a little bit, like a very small amount. And then when more evidence comes out, we're not changing our mind. We're just going with the new evidence, and it's taking that and shifting the beat in the other direction, which I think, yeah, I actually really like that analogy. I think I'm gonna use that going forward. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's I've never heard it being used. I haven't heard it used in ages, but it just really stuck with me in one of his presentations when he came over here a long time ago in the UK. So
I think it's just like a really simple heuristic for like your strength of opinion should comport with the strength of the evidence that we have on any given topic.
Exactly. I know we haven't got tons of time left, and this might not be enough time to talk about it, but anyone who follows your Instagram, you've mentioned it a few times, you love cooking. And I don't know how long you've had a Ninja Creami for, but I basically got mine at like the start of prep for my birthday. So I got it the 25th of May. So now everyone knows when my birthday is. You can send me presents.
Yes.
So yeah, I got a Ninja Creami, and this is a story of how obsessed I was with it and how much of a role it was playing in my prep. I basically broke it.
Dude. Sorry, go ahead.
I chucked in frozen bananas and I didn't put any liquid in there, and I was just like, yeah, I can just make a smoothie out of this, and it just busted the blade and everything. I literally that same day went to a store, sort of like reserved one, picked it up, walked it home like 45 minutes carrying this thing because I was like, I have a Ninja Creami frozen that I want tonight. Anyway, that's how much I'm in love with the machine. So if you haven't got one now, they can sponsor me too. They can sponsor both of us. How are you enjoying it? How long have you had it?
The Ninja Corporation, man.
Let's get your
far
thoughts.
Larger than Versa grips. But no, I fucking love the thing. I think it's super cool. I think that anything that basically makes protein or fruit, also, like you just said, frozen bananas, but you can do it with like any can of fruit, obviously, and turn that into ice cream. I think it's fucking sick. And the fact that you can make really delicious non-diet ice cream with it, and really delicious. You can just basically turn your protein shakes into delicious pints of ice cream is fucking crazy. Like, we live in the future, man. Like, Steve, you've been how long have you been lifting for? Like, how long have you been in this space for?
Yeah, I started lifting when I was 15, so I'm now almost 20 years.
Okay. So you remember when muscle milk was like the option, the only option with respect to protein, and now we live in a world where you can have protein M&Ms, for example, and now you can have and also Ninja just released a new product where you can actually turn it into soft serve as well, which is fucking crazy. And I think that the basically the barrier to entry for delicious protein and like macro friendly dessert options and even just regular meal options is fucking incredible. Again, just lowering the barrier to entry for like balancing out your lifestyle with respect to that. So yeah, huge fan of the Ninja Creami. Couldn't recommend it enough. I'm actually trying to figure out a way to, because you can make ice cream at home very simply with nothing more than like a bowl and a whisk. Genuinely, you just like take it out of the freezer and blah, 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 blah. If you understand like the science of how ice cream works, it's not that complicated. And I haven't tried this yet, but I'm going to start trying to make protein ice creams without my Ninja Creami to see if that's like possible. Because I would love to be able to make a video that's like, hey, look, I know I made a video that was really popular about the Ninja Creami, but like, you don't have to go out and spend $200. Not that it's a large cost or anything, like relatively speaking, as far as kitchen appliances are concerned. But it's, it's got a footprint. It's super loud. It can be annoying in certain ways. So being able to have an option outside of that is obviously really great. But barring everything I just said, I think the Ninja Creami is like the dopest thing ever. And for the somewhat nominal cost that it is, it kind of like pays for itself if you're someone who eats a lot of like Halo Top or Arctic Zero or whatever other ice cream. Not to mention it's like way fucking better than those things are. But like, yeah, I can't suck its dick enough. Essentially, like sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that here. Huge fan of the Ninja Creami. Essentially,
I think every time I could have it, I have had a Ninja Creami. I literally in my depletion weeks that I had in my prep, Cliff would give me a protein. It was basically meat and veggies was like the depletion food, but one of the meals was a protein shake. And I was like, there's no fucking way I'm drinking a protein shake when I'm on like less than 1,500 calories. So I made it with olive oil into like a Ninja Creami, and I had it as a Ninja Creami, and it was like, how this was so much better than a just like protein shake.
You made it with olive oil?
Water, olive oil, and protein powder, yeah.
Interesting. Why the olive oil? Just because you needed the fat, or?
yeah, it was on the meal plan, was like have this much olive oil through the day. I was like, right, I'm not going to have that tablespoon on that meal. I'm going to put it in my Ninja Creami.
Smart, man. Yeah, that's another thing is like it. I said this in the video, obviously, but like taking your protein shake from something that you can drink to something you can eat, like chew and swallow. Like we have direct data comparing smoothies to a fruit and calorie equivalent bowl of fruit. And you see like not like crazy or anything, but you higher satiety results in the hours following its consumption, suggesting that like, yeah, it can make a small difference. Like if you can increase hunger or satiety on a prep, like boy, that is like the number one win right there. And you can take a 200 calorie protein shake and like increase its volume this much and increase the time it takes to finish it by like double. That's obviously going to be a huge win. So it's definitely, and in fact, I haven't had my Creami. I've been bulking or maintaining for the entire period of having the Creami so far. And I am pumped because I'm going to start dieting here soon. And I'm really pumped to see, just to be able to, because I know myself and I'm going to grow obsessed with it. And I'm going to have like 12 tubs of ice cream in my freezer at any point in time. I'm really looking forward to it.
I will say I never got to the point where I had more than one Creami a day. I think I've seen people having like multiple Creamies in a day. I think Matt August was doing that for his prep actually. So
I will certainly be having multiple
Creamies
a day for sure.
What's your go-to kind of, let's get a couple. So one is like your go-to just delicious, good ice cream recipe. And what's your like go-to protein recipe?
So I'll start with protein because it's less controversial. I actually have two. Hope that's okay. One is a Fruity Pebble protein ice cream, which is fucking dope. I love Fruity Pebbles. I don't know if you guys call them Fruity Pebbles on your side of the pond. I feel like you'll have them. Yeah.
They're like Rice Krispies that are flavored fruity in different colors.
No.
Right?
Common misconception. No, they are.
Cornflakes, tiny cornflakes, right?
They're basically tiny cornflakes, but they're so. You guys have Cocoa Krispies or like Rice Krispies over there? That dessert or
Cocoa
that
Pops.
Yeah, probably very similar. But like, yes, I was kind of being a pedantic asshole joking, but yes, essentially they're like Rice Krispie, whatever. But they're just fruity. It's a fruity cereal. You steep it in like some sort of protein shake, you drain it out, and you just make it into an ice cream, and it's fucking out of this world. But you can also just do like chocolate ice cream is usually my go-to, and I do like Combat, which is my like protein of choice. I haven't tried that many protein brands, but Combat protein is just like delicious to me. It's
somewhat
like
better than others.
For sure. I mean, there are some horrible protein powders out there as far as taste is concerned, but it's really good. I haven't tried any of the Ghost or the Isopures, which seem to be really, really popular as well. But that's like my go-to. Big pro tip: xanthan gum or just some sort of an emulsifier is really good in ice cream, and that's true even if you're just making traditional ice cream. It's a ice cream enhancer, people call it, and it has no calories, so that could be. It would basically act as the olive oil did in your shake, but without any calories, obviously. And then my go-to non-protein diet ice cream is Kraft macaroni and cheese ice cream, which sounds crazy, and it is. It's fucking ridiculous. But Van Leeuwen, which is a New York ice cream shop, had this like collab with Kraft where they like did it, and I bought it as a joke, and I was like, holy fuck, this is like the best ice cream I've ever had. And it's like super, you literally just take Kraft macaroni and cheese powder, pour it into your ice cream base, freeze it, and then you have it. And it's like, it sounds crazy, I know, but it's fucking delicious. And before anyone jumps on my back, cheese and dessert have gone together since forever. First of all, if you're in America, if you're in the Midwest, you know that cheese on your apple pie with some ice cream on the side is delicious. I know it sounds crazy, but it's fucking delicious. And like cheese boards for dessert. People always have like fruits and cheese as like dessert at fancy restaurants and shit. So get off my back if you think that's bad. Cheesecake, another great example. Well said, Steve. Thank you. So those are my two go-tos for sure.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny. I had a slice of Christmas cake, which is like fruit cake with like icing on it, and people were messaging me being like, you have to have some cheddar on the side. I was like, cheddar with this? I guess it would just be like fruit and cheese, like at the
right.
Like
exactly,
I totally get it,
bro.
Cheese generally just enhances most things, I think, probably.
So it's hard to say bad things about cheddar cheese, in my opinion.
I haven't tried the xanthan gum yet because I got really burnt using xanthan gum, but I think I probably took it, like anything, you can take it to an extreme, and I would make it into protein fluff, and I ended up stuffing myself, feeling really bloated and sick. So I was like, everyone was telling me, you got to put xanthan gum in there. And I've just been using a frozen banana, which tends to like become a kind of emulsifier in that sense. But I need to get some xanthan gum because I think it will just open my choices a bit more, because everything just kind of tastes banana-y when I
Yeah,
use the
dude,
banana.
like for sure. And I'm not, like, I like bananas, but I'm one of those people where it's like I don't want banana in like most of my like smoothies. Like I don't fuck with most smoothies because it's just banana flavored. And if you have a banana in something, it's basically all you're gonna taste. So
Yeah.
it's definitely, and not to mention, bananas aren't like the lowest calorie fruit option out there. So like
No.
xanthan gum obviously will save you. And when you're prepping, like the 120 calories you get from a banana is gonna like makes a big difference at the end of the day. So
Yeah.
something to consider.
For sure. Yeah, it's I've loved it, but I need to open my horizons, because I'm, like I said before, I kind of get stuck into a way of, like, I found my recipe that works and I get good like ice creams from it, but I'm like, I want to try the gelatos. I haven't tried any other settings but light ice cream. Like, I need to open my horizons to the other available
Do you have
options.
the deluxe option or the OG one?
The OG one.
Yeah. You should get a deluxe one, bro. You don't have to respin nearly as much. If for whatever reason you put a bunch of frozen bananas in yours and it breaks again, maybe the next one you buy is the deluxe option.
Yeah, I purposely didn't, because I was like, I don't want to have, because the pint was bigger, and I was like, I know if I make it, I'm eating the whole thing. Like, it's just if I make the pint, I'm eating the whole pint. I'm not going to save any. So I was like, if I have the smaller one, then I know I can't put too many calories towards this. Probably quite palatable compared to ice cream, much better in terms of dieting. But as a diet food goes, I'd probably be better off having like not fat Greek yogurt with some blueberries.
For sure. And so that's kind of like, I was actually pretty anti like stuff like the Ninja Creami, like macro friendly recipes, which has boomed on social media in the last like 5 years or so. Like the amount of like macro friendly mac and cheeses or buffalo chicken wraps or whatever it may be, like that is a market now. And I've always been pretty anti that. Because of the food palatability reward hypothesis, something like Israel talks about a lot. Like if your food tastes good, like if your protein bar tastes good, it doesn't really matter that the macros are all that great if you're still just going to overeat it in the long run. Is it better than like a non-protein version of that food? Probably. But like if you're making something that tastes so good, even if it has good macros, you still have the likelihood of overeating it. And that's my one contention with that with respect to the creamy, is that like if you're going to be eating that blueberry yogurt or that blueberry Greek yogurt or that Greek yogurt with blueberries, turning that into ice creams, like it only presents positives to me, because yes, it may taste better, but I think that's offset by the fact that like the volume is increased drastically. The time that you have to spend eating it is much longer and stuff like that. So my opinion has changed on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's similar to like using diet drinks during a prep or something. It's like, yeah, they're palatable, but like the downsides versus upsides, like I can see the upsides of like including some diet, like don't go and like abuse them like anything. Don't have Ninja Creami for like breakfast, lunch and dinner probably.
For sure.
But having a bit is like, there's probably the upsides of kind of killing a craving. And like you said, it kind of, some of the food volume kind of equates to the fact it's more tasty and palatable. You kind of make up for that. So I think that's well said. And I'm of the same ilk, like, some things are taken too far, and I certainly got into trouble trying to make things too tasty during preps and using too many hacks, and you just become a bit of a bloated mess. Just generally, if you do that, your digestion goes terribly, basically to the shitter. I was going to say, which is like an intended pun. Max, thank you so much for your time. This has been a fun chat. Is there anything else you kind of have in the works? Anything you want to let the listeners know about? Where should they be following you on Instagram and such?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I actually canceled my Joe Rogan interview to be here, so just know that I made some pretty big sacrifices for today. No, I'm just kidding. It's a huge honor to be on the Revive Stronger podcast, man. It's like someone said, like you're the Graham Norton of the fitness industry, which is really cool. Nothing crazy in the works. Still doing the same old me, starting the PhD program here, hopefully at Lehman under Dr. Schoenfeld soon, which is really exciting. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of cool studies coming out of there. But aside from that, I'm just going to keep trucking along and doing the same thing that we've been doing, talking about food and fitness as much as I possibly can until people tell me to stop.
Are you going to be documenting your diet at all, out of interest?
Like over the course of my PhD, or just
like, hey, I don't know, physique updates, anything like that? I know that's not been a big thing that you do, but I just wondered.
Yeah, unfortunately, my physique is not where I establish my credibility, so it's not usually something I rely on super heavily. But yeah, of course, like I think that as certainly as I go through my PhD, I think showing people ways in which you can make like living this kind of like fitness lifestyle that you and I love so much while having a busy life. Cause like you're really busy and stressed when you're in a PhD program. And I think that being able to provide an outlet to people showing like, here are some ways in which I make this sustainable during hard times will be valuable. And I do plan on doing some of that here soon.
Cool. Love that. Yeah, I think that would be really great for people. And like I said, I think Max is doing great content and should definitely be following him over on Instagram and keeping up to date with his work. And I'm excited for, your hard work with the PhD and what comes out from that. So guys, I'll link all of Max's stuff below. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Max. And we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality and we know how to do it. And we will help you achieve this. The Minicut movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.